Hey everyone, Dr. Justin Marchegiani here, back with Beyond Wellness Radio. Today we'll be chatting with Jessica and Candace, a mother-daughter duo from yourhormonebalance.com. We'll be talking about all things female hormone today. We'll be talking about testing. We'll be talking a little bit about physiology and science and what's happening, and then also some strategies that you guys can implement as well. Jess and Candace, welcome to the podcast. How y'all doing?
We're doing
Fine.
great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Awesome.
we're
Nice to meet you
excited.
guys.
You
Awesome.
too.
So why don't we we chatted in the pre-interview about Candace, how you kind of started your healthcare journey in the natural female hormone balance world. Why don't we just start there a little bit and then we can kind of bring everyone up to current day.
Yes. Okay. So when I got to around 48 years old, I was the mom, the late mom, coming to motherhood late. I had a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old, and I was having a hot flash every 20 minutes and a mood swing in between. And, I was sort of middle of winter, open the windows, everybody is freezing. So what? Put on a sweater. What do I care? I'm having a mood swing. And at one day, Ryan, my little one, looked at me with tears in her eyes. It was like she didn't recognize me. She was afraid of me. And I realized that this was a milestone moment. I was in just turning, 50. And I was like so many women still today, not understanding, am I in perimenopause? What's happening? This must be a hormonal thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to, since I was in the health education space, I was a journalist for, at that time, writing all about health articles. And I thought, what the hell? I'm not even looking at my hormones. So I wrote to Dr. John Lee, who wrote the book, What Your Doctor May Not Tell You About Menopause. And he also wrote What Your Doctor May Not Tell You About Premenopause. And he was one of the first people out there that put this whole discussion on the map. So I wrote to him and I said, I'm a woman in menopause. I have 2 daughters that that are afraid of me. And I want to learn. I'm a health educator. I want to specialize in this. What can I do? And his co-author, Virginia Hopkins, wrote back to me and said, well, Dr. Lee is he's on the way to retirement, but there's a Dr. David Zava in Portland, Oregon, who has started saliva testing, made saliva testing available for the commercial market, which it hadn't really been before. Saliva testing was used in the scientific province, but wasn't made available. So I called him up and went out there and promptly had a hot flash in front of him, or a few of them. He said, that's good, because I've been looking for someone like you who can do some education for me and who knows what a hot flash is. And he said, so how could I have advertised for that? I knew I would find you. So that's kind of how it happened. He became my mentor. I was hired on the spot and was there for 12 years. And the whole emphasis was educate, educate, educate. At that point in time, there was an explosion of functional medicine was happening. Jonathan Wright was doing urine testing. There were other people in the field, but it wasn't that known universally. And Dr. Zava started lecturing for PCCA, Pharmaceutical Compounding Centers of America. So we were going all over the country. And, it just ensued that I met everybody in that space in those years and learned from them and learned from, we were doing testing. At the time, we were doing thousands of tests. And now I think they've done millions of tests, over 10 million tests with ZR. So I'm really in the saliva camp, and we can talk about that more. But I think when I left ZRT finally, because it got to be that you get into the higher echelons and then you're not really talking to the people that are needing the help and the information.
Right.
So I left and I started Your Hormone Balance, and it's just an amazing thing that my daughters are now involved in this too, because they used to run screaming from the room whenever I would talk about hormones. They were so sick of it. Not to mention having to deal with me, right? Having my meltdowns. So,
makes sense.
It was quite the wild ride.
Yeah. And how about you, Jess? Do you want to interject too?
Yeah. So, I mean, I didn't grow up wanting to be in the hormone business. In fact, it's probably the last thing I thought I would do, because she was so passionate about it and always bringing it up. It was in high school. Any little ailment that we had was like, we should check your hormones. It's probably a hormone. It's probably a hormonal thing. Your adrenals need help. She wasn't big on me getting on hormonal birth control, and I did it anyway. And I ended up just having to go through my own journey and my own path, and spent about took 12 years yo-yo dieting,
Mhm.
gaining and losing the same 45 pounds, and was very much in that restrict binge mentality. I was on hormonal birth control. I didn't have a natural period. I was experiencing a lot of symptoms when I hit around 30, which
Mhm.
were pretty concerning, like very low energy, 3 p.m. crash, very low libido. The biggest
Mhm.
thing was debilitating migraine headaches. And
Mm.
so it was kind of that rock bottom moment where I felt like, okay, I'm ready to go back to my roots, ask my mom for support and help. I'm ready to transition off hormonal birth control, test my
Right.
hormones. I did all the things, uncovered all of these imbalances, and went on to really follow the protocol that we now support our clients with, which we weren't doing at the time. The business wasn't around quite
Mhm.
yet. It almost was. And as a result, I was able to transition off hormonal birth control and get a natural period back and jump
Which
off
took
of.
2 years, right?
No, it took 8 months after coming off of hormonal birth control, but that required, and we can talk about this later, but adding in more foods, focusing on blood sugar support, adding in
Right.
specific supplements, bioidentical progesterone cream, really starting to be intentional about the movement and the way that I treated my body. And because I saw such a huge change, I feel like this is how a lot of healers and educators and doctors are in this space, that it was almost like I didn't have a choice. I had to help other women to do this as well. And so I went back to the Institute for Integrative Nutrition to become a board certified holistic health coach, took their hormone health extension course, and really studied with my mom, and then eventually joined forces as a partner with Your Hormone Balance.
Awesome. Well, let's start just kind of break down some of the physiology and what's going on here. So we're talking about menopause, we're talking about perimenopause, and then we're talking about maybe cycle irregularities or PMS. So I
Mhm.
just want to just kind of frame things out a little bit, and I want to get your guys' take on it. So menopause is pretty a little more straightforward, right? We haven't had a cycle for 12 months, right? Typically 12 complete cycles, right?
Mhm.
No cycles at all. We start to have the classic symptoms, hot flashes, could be weight gain, could be sleep issues, could be vaginal dryness, mood irritability, skin elasticity. That's kind of your menopause. Then your perimenopause is you're starting to have some of these menopausal symptoms throughout the month, but you're still cycling.
Mhm.
Would that be
Mhm.
the biggest way to differentiate perimenopause and menopause?
That's a good summary.
Yeah. And then we just
Oh,
have our run of the mill PMS, which can easily feel like perimenopause too. I think the biggest
Mhm.
differentiating thing would be like perimenopause is going to be more throughout the month, where PMS is more going to be that week or so before your period and into the period. Does that be the biggest differentiator there
Well,
with
and
PMS?
also
Yeah.
with perimenopause, one of the number one signs is irregular cycles. And it's not
Mhm.
always but that is one of
Right.
the first signs, is your period starts to maybe become longer than it ever was before, or you're
Right.
skipping a period here and there, and ovulatory cycles, which means that you're
Right.
not producing enough progesterone, because progesterone is produced upon ovulation. So that's one of the
Correct.
main,
Yeah.
differentiators.
Yeah, and just I think
it-
you see a lot more hot flashes with perimenopause than you do
Yes.
with PMS. You can see them, but and then usually that PMS is that week or so ish time frame, where perimenopause could be anytime. It may not be at a specific time during the month.
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah,
Exactly.
the hormones really start to fluctuate in perimenopause, and that's where all these symptoms. It's often called the roller coaster. Women feel
Yes.
like they're on a roller coaster. They can't get off, and the symptoms are usually unfamiliar to them, or whatever symptom.
Right.
But it seems like, from what I've seen in test results over the years, even after 9/11, I remember we started seeing more adrenal stress in the diurnal curve of cortisol, and seeing more women with fluctuating hormones who were in their in their late 30s. We used to think of perimenopause being more of a mid 40s onset. But younger and younger women seem to be experiencing these hormonal fluctuations, so where they're up and they're down, and they have symptoms of estrogen deficiency and symptoms of estrogen dominance at the same time. And all these changes in their moods and their memory and their sleep, and it really is that perimenopause period that's harder. I think the bumps are,
Mhm.
they're more difficult, and it can last for 8 to 10 years. Which, depending on when it started, depending on your stress levels, depending on your nutrition, so many women are not eating properly. They're in, especially in perimenopause. I think those years are, we've got women who are at the peak of performance. They've got a they're in their, a powerful job, or they've got a full-blown career, they've got kids, they've got aging parents, they're trying to stay thin, and they're trying to exercise, they're trying to get some time in for themselves, and it's pretty difficult. And women are so notorious for doing things for everybody else but themselves. So when I talk to women that age, they rarely have time to practice self-care. They tend to equate it with selfishness. That's not everyone. I mean, the rare people realize, but the more stress you're handling, the more stress starts to take center stage in your life, the worse that perimenopause is, as an experience of aging.
Yep. And I test women, thousands of women over the last 15 years, cycling age, in their 40s. And what I'm seeing more and more of is lower progesterone, lower DHEA, lower hormones, even women in their 20s and 30s, where it could be a perimenopausal, even menopausal level. I see
Yeah.
progesterone
Yep.
in that 5, 6, 7 ng per ml level, where healthy, cycling luteal phase levels maybe around 15 to 20. So I see significant drops. And it makes sense because you will convert progesterone into cortisol and stress hormones.
Right.
So the more stressed you are, and stress can come from hidden inflammatory sources. It can come from dysglycemia. It can come from inflammatory foods, gluten, gut stress. How about all the xenoestrogens in the environment
Oh my
gunking up
God.
our detoxification systems? There's a lot of issues. And this chronic stress also then impacts like the feedback loop from the brain, right? The LH and the FSH feedback loops that then talk to the ovaries. Can you talk about the chronic stress, what it's doing, and talk about a little more about the feedback loop, that HPA axis as well?
Well, I think that the chronic stress is just, the inability of women to manage their stress. They're trying to do everything all at once. And we see these levels, we're looking at a test result for a cortisol pattern that is highest in the morning. The cortisol awakening response should be highest. Those levels should stay robust through the noon and then start gradually dropping evening into nighttime. And instead, I'm often seeing very low levels in the morning, and people saying that they can't get out of bed. It's so difficult to drag themselves out of bed, and sort of a less than robust levels at noon, and yet these high levels, higher levels towards evening and nighttime. And the kind of tired but wired syndrome. So you can't get out of bed in the morning, and you're ready to run a marathon at night. And the whole hypothalamic pituitary axis, adrenal axis, is involved in this whole feedback loop is completely offset. The oversight of homeostasis in the body is offset by these cortisol hormones that start to predominate. I mean, if progesterone is low, then the adrenals go wanting. They're gonna steal any progesterone they can get from its reproductive responsibilities. The pregnenolone steal they talk about, the precursor of progesterone that's so important. Actually, I was just listening to an interview with you and Dan Kalish, and you were really emphasizing the importance of pregnenolone, which I think is still something that's, I don't think many people know about it or think about taking it, but I think that could be a real bonus. Is that very helpful to get that HPA axis back on track, the use of pregnenolone?
I think it can be very helpful, but if you want to go one step above that, I mean, what makes pregnenolone? It's cholesterol. So I think having healthy animal fats, animal proteins provide really good building blocks. Plus, you're going to get a lot of fat soluble vitamins, vitamin A, and you're not getting a whole bunch of carbohydrate and processed food with it. Especially if it's grass fed or we're choosing good quality sources, there's a lot of nutrient density there. I think that's a big one too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to your point earlier, where you've seen people in their 20s and 30s that have levels that look like someone in maybe menopause.
Oh yeah.
I had a client who literally just got her period for the first time pretty much ever. And she's 35, and it's because she has been a marathon runner since she was basically 16 years old, and also struggled with periods of anorexia and some other eating disorders, and just struggles with consistency in her diet. And so her body was in this state of malnourishment, in addition to not getting enough protein or healthy fats, very much focusing on carbohydrates for her runs, but not getting in those
Right.
anti-inflammatory fats, had been on birth control at one point, and then was very nutrient deficient from that as well. And
Right.
so it can be really hard when you're working with someone like that to convince them that they need to eat more and,
Correct.
and fats, which are higher in calories.
Right.
And so,
But building blocks of
but
hormones.
building blocks,
Mhm.
yeah, of, cholesterol being the backbone of sex hormone production. So, and that's not an anomaly, it's happening. It doesn't necessarily have to be a marathon runner, but I see women all the time
Mhm.
who are in steep calorie deficits for years. And then the only time that they're not in a calorie deficit is when they are binging and or intentionally on vacation or whatever it is. And that's a huge stress on your body to have those big swings, in addition to trying to keep up with maybe their male counterparts' workout routines and hitting HIIT training, 4 or 5 times a week, which is what I used to do, surviving off of caffeine and
Right.
energy drink, skipping meals, fasting before the workouts. And here you have maybe complete amenorrhea where you're not having a period
Right.
at all, or a lot of anovulatory cycles, which then again, you're not producing enough progesterone and the body just doesn't feel safe enough to ovulate.
Right.
And so we really have to create that safety in
Mhm.
the body in order to begin to ovulate and create a more regular cycle without a lot of PMS, which is the goal.
And that
Yeah.
disruption of the progesterone goes. So, I think a lot of people don't understand. You say the word stress and they think of acute things like
Right.
accidents, injuries, but it's really so much, or, work stress or money stress or family stress.
Correct.
But there are the stressors of over exercise is a stressor upon
Correct.
the body. We know that those women you're talking about, she hadn't had a period, they're not ovulating, they're not producing the right amounts of hormones. And, when progesterone is low or any of the sex hormones are low, other hormones, it's like the instruments in the orchestra, you get this imbalance. So, for instance, the estrogen and progesterone, if they're taking a hit, they're not going to be able to do their anti-androgen responsibilities of keeping androgens in check. So then you have higher levels of testosterone. You have,
Mhm.
and then you have symptoms of the acne and the oily skin and the feeling edgy and irritable and the weight gain in the abdomen and down the road, perhaps some, the development of PCOS. I just think that women don't realize that under eating, not getting enough protein, not getting enough good fat, the building blocks of
Right.
hormones, taking, cholesterol lowering drugs
Mhm.
is lethal for production of hormones. The different
Yep.
stresses on our bodies are not always quite so obvious. But I think it's important for women to understand that it's when you drink coffee on an empty stomach and call that breakfast and then run off to do your spinning class, madly exercising 5, 6 days a week. And a lot of women are doing that and they're so frustrated. And what's happening? They're getting belly fat that they can't lose, a typical cortisol
Mhm.
sign of imbalanced cortisol and an HPA axis that is impaired. That sort of thing drives people crazy. People don't understand why they're not sleeping well. When cortisol is high at night, we
Mhm.
see that a lot. What happens with the appetite hormones? They're on the sleep wake cycle.
Mhm.
They get out of balance and you've got ghrelin, the hunger hormone, rising, so you're hungry, or you got sugar cravings, and you've got leptin, the hormone that's telling you you're full, dropping. So there's so many intertwined things that are going on that have to be explained so that people actually get what what all is going on, and then start
Mhm.
to take it apart and approach each of these things that we need to do.
And I think a lot of the low calorie dogma and a lot of the low fat dogma of like the 90s to the 2000s, I think women tend to be more health conscious. And this type of eating is like one of the worst ways to negatively impact your hormones, because then
Yeah.
you cut out all the raw material to build your hormones. And then when you start going into the calorie
Yeah.
model, like Jess said earlier, well, fats has 9 calories per gram, where protein or carbs have 4. So let's cut out the
Mhm.
one that has more. So then you start going lower calorie again. And then if you go low fat, then you tend to eat more processed foods, right? Because the only way
Mhm.
you can get really low fat is either you eat very lean pieces of protein or you eat a lot of food that are packaged in these low calorie bags that then avoid a lot of the fats. Or if they have fats in it, it's processed vegetable oils that are rancid and oxidized. So it's just
Yeah.
the first thing I think is going back to just getting the raw material in. And then you talked about stress earlier. Low calorie dieting can actually be a stressor, or even intermittent fasting if you're a female who
Mhm.
already has hormonal issues, and
Yeah.
then you're not allowing consistent nutrition and stable blood sugar throughout the day because you're fasting or doing maybe just coffee in the morning. That can be a stressor too, right?
Yeah,
Oh
absolutely. I
God.
mean, it's there's so many factors. It starts with how you start your day. I always say
Hmm.
that creates a ripple effect throughout the rest of the day. So if
Hmm.
you are getting up and I mean, especially the perimenopause age, to my mom's point, those are women in their late 30s, early 40s. A lot of them tend to have young children or even teens. And that's kind of my primary demographic for my clients. And it's so hard to get your kids ready and off to work and off to school and still make time to feed yourself. And so that's where I see a lot of the
Mhm.
racing to the coffee pot. Then you're stressed in the morning and your cortisol is already highest in the morning, which is good because we need that to get up and go. But if you're pummeling stress on top of that already high level, and then,
For
we're
it to be
skipping
low.
breakfast and then our blood sugar levels are crashing. And then naturally, we're going to reach for something that's quick and easy, which isn't always something balanced, and it creates this kind of vicious cycle throughout the day. Then you're crashing at 3 p.m. And then that's why you see the line outside of Starbucks, people getting their pastries and their coffee fix. And then, you're getting to the end of the day and maybe eating this huge meal before bed. And then you're struggling with sleep. And then that ripples into the next day. And so it really is, I always say it starts with the morning and how you nurture your nervous system in the morning. And even just setting aside that 5 to 10 minutes to create something quick. Balanced meals do not have to take a long time. There's so many things that you can make. Prep puddings with protein
Hmm.
in it, and just a simple smoothie, a protein
Hmm.
smoothie with healthy fats. I think it really is just starting with, okay, how can I prioritize myself first before I prioritize everybody else? And
Correct.
even, not grabbing your phone first thing in the morning. I think that's
Right.
something many of us are guilty of. But then all of a sudden, the rest of the world has your attention and has control over your day versus you being able to have control over your day and the way that you start it. And so I just feel like the morning is, I think people are obsessed with morning routines, but I also think that they are incredibly important and to bio individualize it to you as well.
I
I think
agree. Hmm.
interestingly, how about the phone at night? The number
Right.
of people that are on their cell phone at night and can't sleep and don't have any idea. They're playing Words with Friends at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Hmm. Hmm.
Before bed, they're on their cell phones, and there's so many people that are not aware of the impact of the blue light upon the
Hmm.
disruption of melatonin. And that's so, here we are in the morning, we're on our phone, and at night we're on our phone. And in both
I would
cases,
I would argue that a lot of people at this point do know that blue light
I
is
hope so.
an interference. I think there's obviously still some people that don't, but I think that it's an addiction.
They're still doing
And
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
it's like we can know that something
Hmm.
isn't necessarily beneficial for our sleep, and that's something I work with clients all the time. I know I shouldn't be checking my phone right before bed,
Yeah.
but, it's like at the end of a long day, it is the easy thing. It's the easy thing to do. The hard thing to do would be to turn off your phone and put your laptop away and not watch TV and really just focus on your breath or listen to a guided meditation or read a calming book or journal. But if you can stick to it for, I say, 7 days, just start with 7 days,
Hmm.
you will notice the impact in how you feel so quickly that you're going to have that motivation to keep moving, because motivation doesn't
Hmm.
just come randomly. It comes from
Hmm.
experiencing results and then feeling motivated to keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I think it's important to have healthy habits, and the healthier your nervous system is, the more you can adapt from, watching TV to go into sleep. But if you can't do that, then you have to pace in that time for your body to adapt and or add
Mhm.
in nutrients like magnesium or theanine, things that will help
Yeah.
bring
Absolutely.
your nervous system down, or just do simple strategies of like, hey, when you watch that TV show, put some blue blocking glasses on, have all your
Mhm.
lights dimmed down really low. So you at least mitigate some of the stress with some other kind of hobbies or habits in between there to kind of lessen the blow, if you will. Thoughts?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's interesting too that It sounds like not even that much of a hack, but starting with, if you're the person who watches a show at night with your significant other, with your food while you're watching the show, and then you also have your phone next to you and you're checking your phone while you're watching the show, while you're eating, this is going to impact not only your cortisol and your stress levels
Mhm.
and your nervous system, but also the ability to digest and absorb your foods,
Sure.
because you actually assimilate more nutrients from your
Yep.
food when you slow down, when you eat, and you'll have a lot more satiety. And
Mhm.
so I tell people, okay, let's not try to do everything overnight, but let's start with, can you put your phone in a different room and
Yeah.
just be present at least with the show that you're watching with your partner, and start
Mhm.
there. And even just doing that, I have clients that are like, oh my gosh, I was so much more present. I enjoyed the experience so much more. I wasn't anxious because I'm also on my phone sending emails. And, and then it's like, okay, then let's take it a step further and back it up and have dinner before you watch the show. And then also keep the phone out of the
Mhm.
dining room. And then after that, okay, let's start the show a little bit earlier, give yourself a 20-minute buffer after the show so you can get in bed and do something a little bit more calming. And I think it's, we gotta layer on. I think when we go from one extreme to the other, that's where people burn out and they're not going to be consistent.
Yeah, not too true.
I 100% agree with that. We just try to have good habits, layer in some good habits to try to neutralize it and try to make sure we have good sleep. And the more fragile someone's nervous system is, the more we have to be more strict. And so I think some good testing to assess nervous system function is adrenals. Adrenals can be a really good
Mhm.
window into adaptation. So looking at your cortisol rhythm can be a good sign of how adaptive your HPA axis is, or also looking at your DHEA sulfate reserves from your adrenals, because we know that that's the backup generator as
Yeah.
your ovarian function starts to drop. That becomes the building blocks to help fill in what's not being made by the adrenal. So let's talk more about that, Candace.
Well, I think, I mean, I noticed too that often there's low DHEA on board with women who are, living this stress-ridden life, and it can be so helpful to supplement with DHEA. I never, I hate to, when I see like a woman I talked to the other day, 5'10", 138 pounds, 36 years old, hasn't had a period in ages, wants to have a, wants to get pregnant, very concerned about her weight, that she's gaining a little weight at 138 pounds when she's 5'10". And, she's just got
Mhm.
this, she's a tired but wired person, and her estrogen, you see in these people, these are where you see the levels that look like menopause. She's got low estrogen, low progesterone, low DHEA. um, the cortisols were opposite of what they should be, low in the morning, high at night. And I don't like to have, you could look at that test result and you could say, well, your estrogen's low, your progesterone's low, let's get you on some, the immediate thing might be, if you're at a doctor who doesn't know any better, let's write a prescription for these hormones. But you have to start in a person like that with adrenal support. That's the first place to really to begin. And so that starts, that gets into doing all those things that we're talking about here. And also with supplements, I think, most people are deficient in magnesium. Many people are not using B complex, and the B, they may be taking B12 to increase their energy, but not aware that all the B complex, the B5 and B6 in particular, are so important for adrenal support. The adaptogenic herbs that are out there that can be so helpful. And DHEA is a great way to help, the body produce its own, convert to um, testosterone and then to estrogen preferentially. But the body knows in its wisdom how to use these supplements, especially when they are matching up with the receptor sites. You're delivering a bioidentical form of these hormones so that they're not synthetic, but they're made to duplicate the molecular structure and function of our own hormones, and then they can get in there, fit onto that receptor site and start jamming, flip the switches that matter. So I think, yeah, I mean, we have to utilize, I like to see a duplication of physiology as close as we can get to duplicating, to mimicking physiology is what we want to do. We want to use, phytoestrogens, plant-based foods that are similar to estrogen in their structure, and they're weaker estrogens, but they can mimic that activity at the cellular level. And that's the way to begin, I think, gently, slowly, at some point, and then retesting to monitor how those changes are occurring, especially if you're using anything like progesterone. I personally, when I was 48 and I had all those symptoms, I started making changes to my lifestyle, not drinking coffee so much, and not, skipping meals and rushing around all the time. But I also needed a little something. I needed some support that came in the form. I remember the first adaptogenic drug herb I used was Dong Quai. And it was so, and it's another estrogen mimicker. And it was such a game changer. It just took me right out of the black hole that I was in. And other herbs that I started using. And then progesterone, I did end up testing and find, at that point, I didn't even know there was such a thing as, a test. But when I tested, I was awfully low in all these hormones, and a little bit of progesterone, just the lowest effective dose, in a topical delivery system, so we're not having to compromise the gut and the liver, was really magic. I think my girls would say I became a person you could live with again.
Yeah, we're like, Mom, where's your cream? You should put that on.
And what about testosterone too? Because I looked at some of the lab markers and kind of looked at everything, and I didn't realize that most women may not, but the most predominant hormone in a female's body is actually testosterone, by 2 to 3x compared to estrogen, and 5 to 6 compared to progesterone outside of that ovulation period. I never knew that. I think that's interesting. Now, I think most women, they can get pathological levels of testosterone if they don't manage their blood sugar, if they have insulin resistance, they develop PCOS. So that's to a bad level. That's actually the number one cause of infertility in women is PCOS, which the androgens, and then that can impact prolactin. But let's talk about testosterone. Where does that come in? And are you supporting testosterone with certain herbs? Are you doing it via DHEA and having that trickle downstream, those androgens pathways?
I am not a big fan of suggesting, I mean, obviously we don't prescribe anything, but I would much rather go the indirect route of talking about DHEA that will convert, and also supporting the adrenals, and doing, strength training, I think is a great way. It is a great way to boost lean muscle and thus, wake up those testosterone receptors. I think so many women are doing, the pellets, that I haven't, many of the people that come to us have done pellets and went from hero to zero. They feel fantastic at first. And then a few months later, it crashes, and they crash, and it's not, there never should be a hormone taken in isolation. Never.
Well, you can go run a pellet. There's so many studies on pellets where they'll do a pellet for 4 to 6 months. And then the first month it's here, the next month it's here, the next month it's here. And then if you look at where you were month 1 to month 4 or 6, there's like a 60 or 80% drop. It's like, well, if you're going to do hormones and you're not cycling anymore, we want to keep that hormone pretty stable day to day. But when you have that kind of variation months apart, that's not going to feel good.
It doesn't feel good. And then what about the conversion to estrogen? I always think, I think about it in men who rush to get testosterone injections, not even realizing that it's increasing their testosterone levels. It can convert to, that it's converting to estrogen, and you see SHBG abnormalities in those people, in men as well, and women. So we don't usually, we don't usually test men, but I have seen interesting situations with men that are all about testosterone and don't realize that men and women share all the same hormones, right? Just in differing amounts. You said, I thought it was interesting too, what you said about testosterone being the main hormone. And I think that's, has a predominance, and especially during menopause, because, the estrogen, the progesterone are down. The cortisol is sort of running the show, and testosterone remains sort of steady. It's not as influenced by those fluctuations. So that's where you get, women who are older, we're always dealing with the chin hairs and the bad moods and the crabbiness and the weight gain around the abdomen, and, all of those issues that really I think, relate to that steady level of testosterone in the absence of the other supportive hormones as they decline.
I
Jess,
also
any
think,
thoughts? Yeah.
I was going to say, I also think all around just blood sugar support is for everything that we're talking about, especially with high testosterone levels. It's so incredibly important to support your blood sugar. And so, because we see a lot of insulin resistance, right, tied with high testosterone. And so that's really where I begin. I mean, huge fan of supplementation and
Mhm.
everything that we've been talking about, adrenal support, nourishing the nervous system, but we can do all of that as well through prioritizing blood sugar balance. And what I see with a lot of clients that come to us, and to me specifically, is they're not actually eating an unhealthy diet. They're eating, a lot of them are eating whole foods. They listen to podcasts like this.
Mhm.
That's how they find us, right? So they're listening to all the health podcasts. They're nourishing their mind. They're aware of these things and they're eating whole foods. I mean, of course, there's not everybody is eating all whole foods. I don't even do that myself, but for the most part, they're aware. The thing that I'm finding is that they're not aware of how to properly combine their foods. So maybe
Right.
they're eating, like we talked about earlier, a chia pudding, but they're just using the chia seeds and the almond milk and the fruit and maybe some
Mhm.
oats. And then it's basically carbs and a little bit of fat and like a tiny bit of protein. And so while that's quote unquote healthy, because we see that
Mhm.
all over Instagram as like a healthy option, where I'm going to look at that and say, okay, let's increase the protein. I want us
Mhm.
to be at a minimum of 20, 25 to 35 grams of protein.
Mhm.
Start with that foundation. Make sure that we have a really good fiber source so that we're slowing the absorption of the carbohydrates. We're bringing in an couple 1 to 2 to 3 servings of anti-inflammatory fats. And then if we are going to have a carbohydrate, we're choosing a nutrient rich carbohydrate that's going to be able to support. So maybe glyphosate free oats, or we're doing sweet potatoes, or we're using like a whole grain bread or something like that. And so it's not, for me at least, it's not cutting out carbs completely or demonizing a specific macronutrient. It's learning how to properly pair it. And then I always say bring in bliss boosts, which is just my word for fresh herbs and seasonings,
Mhm.
adaptogens, superfood powders, and things like that. And so I have a formula called the Sexy Six formula that includes
Mhm.
these 6 things at every meal. And I always encourage people to do a cup to 2 cups or more of low glycemic vegetables at every meal as well.
Mhm.
Obviously, breakfast is a little bit harder, but
Mhm.
if you can't get it in at breakfast, maybe do a little green scoop on the side, or just, I always throw spinach in my eggs. There's easy ways of getting it in. But once we nail that, I see so many symptoms improve. I mean, people can see a drastic, I have seen people completely uh, eliminate their panic attacks just from balancing their blood sugar and bring down their anxiety levels and eliminate the 3 p.m. crash and be able to release weight more easily. And I'll see testosterone levels come down as well. And so
Mhm.
it has this huge ripple effect. And I just don't think it's still not talked about enough, because we are still in a society, especially as it relates to weight loss and fitness, that is so focused on calories and macros. And while those are important, it completely negates the balance of foods and the specific nutrients that you're getting at each meal.
And some of those foods you're talking about also should include the cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and
Right.
Brussels sprouts and kale and cauliflower that are so effective at promoting proper estrogen metabolism, which is, a big key. There are three pathways: the good pathways, the bad pathways. We want to move that estrogen down the proper pathway so that the body uses it and loses it. It isn't recirculated. That's where things like calcium D-glucarate and DIM can come in as supplements if people are estrogen dominant, to try to bring those estrogen levels, to have healthy metabolism, not have it not having estrogen recirculating in the body,
Mhm.
which can
Mhm.
happen
Mhm.
so easily. And we see, high levels of estrone and stored estrogen in women's bodies, which is a real risk for breast cancer because estrogen is a growth hormone. We don't want it, we need to regulate its growth activity. It's what's behind breast cancers and endometriosis and the long-term problems that we see, but also, the early problems that we see in people, like the heavy painful periods, and the cysts and all of that, fibroids. It's fear of hugging, breast tenderness, that kind of thing. So
Mhm.
anyway, with our diets, yeah, it's important to get in the crucifers, not to eat them raw, but to steam them, saute them, bring them in, and if it's hard to get the amount of crucifers you need every day, which can be quite a bit, you can use the DIM, which is an extract that has that
So
sulforaphane.
when we look at our estrogens, right, we have the 2, 4, the 16, and the 2 is the
Yeah,
more protective, right? Where the 4 and 16
two
can
is
be a little
good.
bit more cancerous or a little bit more
Yeah,
DNA damaging, right? And so we want to, you said the sulfur, like the DIM or the sulforaphane. You mentioned
has been
calcium, the
shown to
glucarate.
kind
Mhm.
of ferry the estrogens down to that phase 2 detox that we want, that down that
Right.
pathway. And I think Jeffrey Bland talked about that back in the day. He was one of the first people to start discussing that important thing. That's one of the places where urine testing can be helpful, because you can track that. You can see if your hormones are metabolizing down the proper pathways. I don't get into that complexity of testing, because I find most women are just needing to, they're approaching this, and it's all a learning curve right now. So just to start with saliva testing, which is great because it measures without needles, without causing stress. It's really the gold standard of adrenal testing, because needles can skew those results. It's non-invasive. You use it in you can test at optimal times, and then you can see, what your levels are. Uh, I forgot what was. I just lost my train of thought. That's what
Well,
happens in menopause.
we're talking about the estrogens and
Oh yeah, the tracking of the
2
pathway.
is good, 4 and 16
Yeah,
are not quite as good. And then just to kind of give some of the nutrients, right? Your B vitamins, your magnesium,
yeah.
your folate, your B12, your choline, your NAC, and again, some of the foods, your leafy greens, your eggs, any beef liver, those are going to asparagus, all your cruciferous. Those are the big things that you can do to kind of
Hmm.
push those estrogens from 4 to 16 into that more safer 2
Push.
range.
I'm
Right.
curious from you, since I know that you specialize in gut health too, what are your thoughts on L-glutamine? Like taking that as a supplement, and glycine?
Well, I mean, I think those are good nutrients to kind of promote gut healing, help the
Mhm.
enterocytes heal, but you still have to figure out why the gut's getting raw or irritated to begin with, right? Because there
Right,
could
right.
be, SIBO bacteria imbalances, there could be H. pylori. Maybe we're not breaking the food down enough, hydrochloric acid, enzymes, bile. And, on the hormonal side, if we have a lot of dysbiosis can make
Mhm.
that beta glucuronidase enzyme. That's an
Yeah.
enzyme that it basically junks up estrogen detoxification. So we
Mhm.
conjugate, we bind it to a protein, and then that protein comes off when we have a lot of bad bacteria. That enzyme takes the handcuffs off.
And
And
what's
doesn't
your
it
So
kind of reabsorb
yeah,
estrogen
then
in
it
the
reabsorbs.
body?
So
Yeah.
it was protein bound. It's like someone has handcuffs, they're being escorted out of the club, right? And then you take the handcuffs off. Now they go back and create a ruckus. It's like that in your body
Mhm.
with these conjugated hormones.
I think
Yeah,
that's where calcium deglucarate can be
Yes.
quite
Yeah.
helpful, because
Yep. Calcium glucarate. Yep.
it inhibits the action of glucuronidase,
Yeah.
as I.
And also just getting rid of the bad bacteria, knocking it down from cutting out the foods that feed it or using botanicals to kind of knock down some of those herbs or bringing up probiotics to help crowd out some of them as well.
totally. Yeah, and I think that's where, I think I get it. People get overwhelmed with all of this stuff, and it's like sometimes I'll hear things like, "Oh, I just want to focus on my hormones," and then I'll focus
Mhm.
on the gut and the liver. It's like we have to
It's
focus
all
on
of a
all of
piece.
it together.
Yeah.
It's so important, and I think it is overwhelming with all of the testing that's
Mhm.
available, and so that is why we like to simplify it with saliva testing, because we
Mhm.
have so many clients that, I mean, we've tested thousands at this point, and I would say, 90% of the clients that we've worked with that have had standard blood testing, everything comes back quote unquote normal. And that's
Usually.
not
Yeah.
how they feel, and they're like, I feel crazy. And this is not, I know that I don't, I know that things aren't
Can you talk more
normal.
about why though? Like why is that? What's blood testing missing that some of the other more functional testing is picking up?
I can speak to that. Just,
Mhm.
the The thing about blood testing, I remember Dr. Zava used to say, they're complementary, but you're looking at different things. I used to work with
Mhm.
Mark Newman, who owns the Dutch. He runs the Dutch
Yeah.
testing, the
Precision analytics. Yeah.
precision analytics. But we developed that. He actually was head of the saliva lab at ZRT, and he developed that testing at ZRT. And then he went
Oh,
out and started precision analytics. Um, but and we did blood testing too. We do dried blood spot testing of thyroid, all the
Mhm.
thyroids, and vitamin
I've
D.
used that before. Is that
Yeah,
accurate for ZRT, that the blood spot
yeah. I
for the
think
thyroid?
you know
Yeah.
Dr. Zava is a big proponent. He's got lots of papers on that, but the blood spot can be used in a non-invasive, painless way to measure those things easily, as most doctors don't. The standard doctor isn't going to measure free T4 and free T3 and TPO antibodies. So dried blood spot can be used for that. Also
I'll
for
use that for patients that are hours from like a LabCorp Quest too, or running
yeah,
Mhm.
thyroid. If they're hours away, we'll just do a ZRT and have them complete it.
That's
yeah.
perfect.
But I
Yeah.
mean, the standard blood draw can create stress because of needles. You can't,
Correct.
you're not going to prick yourself 4 times to measure your diurnal cortisol curve. That's pretty difficult to get a blood draw 4 times in one day to measure that. It's also not measuring the unbound fraction of hormone that's left,
Mm,
the fraction of hormone that is becoming unbound because the pituitary just said,
right.
hey, she's working out. We need a little more testosterone over here. Let's release some and put it into the
Right.
cell. Need it. So when you measure in saliva, you're really measuring, you're capturing that 2 to 4% fraction that's left the bloodstream and it's moving, it's on its way to the target tissues. Whereas you can't get that in a blood test unless you're measuring free levels, but that's not a standard blood draw. So I'm talking about a standard blood draw is not going to, it's going to measure bound hormones bound to their carrier protein in the bloodstream, not the unbound bioavailable level of hormone. And then when you get into urine testing, you're looking, you're really getting into the weeds. And I started to say with the urine testing and tracking, when you start with the saliva test and you see all these, if you see a bunch of imbalances and you've got high estrogen and you've got, let's say, a history of breast cancer in your family, you might want to go on and do some of this testing of, the what do I mean to say?
For the for the for
that
the urine testing?
the
Yeah, the
the
pathways.
Right.
pathways.
For
We
the
can,
urine, because then you could see the metabolites from 2, 4 to 16 and how
yeah,
it's being
Mhm.
detoxified, right? Yes.
yeah. You don't want,
And so are you supportive of the Dutch testing? I've been using Dutch for quite a few years, but I've used saliva 15 plus years. What's your take on the two, looking at hormones from the urine and or hormones from the saliva?
well, I'm supportive of it, but I have to say because he developed it at ZRT, we have the same exact test. We test all of those pathways and very
Oh, that's
completely.
cool. I'll check that
And
out. That's cool.
I think Dr. Zava actually encouraged Mark. He developed it and it's brilliant and it's really popular and I think it has its place. I just don't think it's a good place to begin because it's a difficult test to interpret. You've got to be working with a functional medicine doctor.
Mhm.
They can be functional medicine doctors are, I liked Dr. Kalish's idea of having a membership kind of uh, relationship with your doctor so that you don't just wait till something's wrong, but you're always monitoring and you're always being coached so that you can see how things are going. And if with saliva testing, if someone has complications, they're not getting better from the simple for, the adrenal support and all these things we've been talking about, then maybe it's time to do the more complex, comprehensive testing in urine. It's also non-invasive, and I think it's just we're measuring different things. You're measuring metabolites in urine. You're measuring the breakdown of hormones. In saliva, you're measuring the hormones, that are actually bioavailable, and in blood, you're measuring bound hormones. So you're measuring different things. You're getting different information.
So with the Dutch, you're getting free fraction metabolites, but you're also getting total. The one thing that I liked is you could see a lot of HPA axis dysfunction when you see high amounts of total, but very low free, or vice versa. High amounts of free, very low total. Usually there could be like an anemia or low thyroid. So I liked how you could see some of the imbalances
Yeah.
Mhm.
on
Mm,
that.
yeah,
Thoughts
that's
on that?
important. I think people, the one thing I find is a problem is that we get a lot of people who do not understand their urine test results. And that's a big problem in the world of testing anyway. Getting the
Mhm.
right getting someone to interpret the results properly and help you understand. How many times do you just get a test result? Here are the numbers. You don't understand what they mean. There's a
What are
range.
some of the biggest things on that test that people miss or even clinicians miss?
On which test? On the urine
On
test?
on the urine or on the saliva test, the ones that you see the most of?
Well, you have all there are these myriad metabolites, and they each take explanation. What does that really mean? And how does that, it's just overwhelming. And I don't think that they're very well explained, because most women I talked to that did the testing had no idea what it really meant. Maybe they got some information around the pathways, but I'm sure what about doctors like you? How much time do you spend interpreting those results for your clients when you run a urine test?
Oh, we'll go over that for 30 minutes and
Yeah.
break it down. And you got to connect it to their lifestyle, to,
Yeah.
your exercise. Okay, you're exercising late. Maybe that's why your cortisol is going up at night. Or let's talk about your food. You're skipping meals here because that play. So you want to understand their lifestyle and overlap it so you understand what's
Mhm.
driving it too.
And the level
Yeah.
of xenoestrogens, that's another thing that I think you can get a better handle on with urine testing. And that is something we haven't mentioned, but we talk about lack of ovulation causing disruption of hormones, stressors that are not quite as obvious all the time, the under eating, all of these things we've mentioned. But what about we're living in a sea of toxins that are
Oh,
duplicating they're estrogen mimickers. So you think of a toxin that comes in as xenoestrogen and BPA. It goes to that receptor site. It binds to the same receptor site,
yeah,
competes with the naturally occurring estrogen, kicks the naturally occurring estrogen off its receptor site, and starts occupying that site like somebody who comes to stay at your house and is sleeping on your couch and won't leave.
right. Oh,
You can't get rid of them.
yeah, and also we're in a sea of it, whether it's in microplastics in our water. So we
Oh
need,
my
at
God.
least a good RO filter, or we're consuming too much plastics, or God forbid you're a cashier at Whole Foods and you're handling the receipts that are layered in
Mhm.
BPA. I mean, nonstop.
Yeah.
Like we're
It,
in a
it
sea
is
of it.
interesting how that's changed now. People say, "Do you want your receipt?" And you usually say no, because I think people have some idea that those inks, one of the
I
things
don't want
I
it. Or I take a
mentioned
picture of it. I'm like, I got it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
microplastics in tea bags.
Yeah.
So
Mhm. And
I
gluten.
have started
Yeah.
using loose tea. I think that's
Yeah.
important. The Tea Ivana tea maker is awesome. Just use a
Mm.
little bit of loose tea, but loose tea, no more tea bags, people, because there's the numerous microplastics in there. But also plastic in general, not heating your food in plastic. How about these foods that are in boil in the bag? What could be worse than
Oh.
Mhm.
Oh,
storing
yeah.
your
Or,
food?
yeah. Or
It
if you're microwaving anything in plastic, the
Yeah.
amount of
micro
leaching that
people
comes
do
out.
it all the time.
Well, and
Yeah.
also even just the little things you don't think about, like cutting on a plastic board, a
Yeah.
Oh, bad.
plastic cutting board, and
How
then
about those
putting
black
that food.
plastic utensils? The black plastic, people use those for,
Hmm.
the spatulas and,
I think
that,
that's a great first place to start is by being aware of the plastics because that is, I would say,
Yeah.
the most problematic in terms of how frequently people are using plastic. Even my husband, he still has some plastic water bottles that he brings with him to the gym, and I'm like, "Ah," like I don't want to
Yeah.
be your coach right now, but
Yeah.
please. Just yesterday I got him to agree to buy a different, like a reusable water bottle.
Yeah.
And it's those little things that you don't think it's that big of a deal, but I always say think about how frequently you're using these things. And also if you're using something on your skin or you're ingesting something, think about not only how often are you using it, but what is the surface area that it's covering. So if you're putting body lotion on your whole body every single day, that's
Mm.
probably something you want to switch out quickly. If you're cutting on your plastic cutting board, you probably want to start with that. If you're drinking out of your water bottle, versus feeling like you have to switch out everything overnight, which again can be incredibly overwhelming. And I don't
Mm.
think any of us are perfect as that goes. But I do think an awareness and finding swaps and brands that perform really well
Yeah.
and are also a similar price point, which is totally doable now. We have so many options.
I mean, you're
Right.
going to find the comet under your sink. You're trying, you got to gradually get rid of this stuff, but cleaning products can be so toxic. cosmetics, hair, all our personal care products, hormones in food, antibiotics, and the meat and the hormones that beef cattle are shot up with. We have to be aware of all of this stuff and try to just avoid it as best as possible. And I think we're living in an era where we can do that a little more easily. We have good choices. We have clean.
So here's a simple hack you can do. Just take a picture of an ingredient label, upload it to ChatGPT, and just say list out each
Mhm.
ingredient, and then give it an environmental wellness group score, because they have all their
Ooh.
scores, and then it'll break each thing down and give it a score and tell you if it's cancer causing
Oh,
or
I
not. It's
love
an easy
that. We
hack.
usually use the Skin Deep database on EWG.
Same
Yeah.
thing. It just
Marketing group.
it just basically uses it through
That's
ChatGPT, so it makes
amazing.
it more, because then you can upload a
Oh,
picture.
There's
I love
another
that.
fun one. Have you heard of Yuka? The Yuka app. You can just
Mhm.
take a picture of the barcode of any product while you're in the store. It'll
Oh,
come up with a
that's
whole
cool.
rundown of how healthy that product is, and
Okay,
what it contains that may be toxic and killing
Mhm.
you. Yeah,
that's
Right?
cool.
one thing I
Yeah, I
want.
mean, the EWG or cosmetic skin's great.
You
Those
were
are awesome.
mentioning
Yep.
receipts. I have a bone to pick with
Mhm.
all these tattoos. What about
Oh,
tattoos?
yeah.
I mean, you see people with, their arms are covered. It's a trendy thing, especially here in Oregon. And my God, I'm thinking that ink. It's that's
It's
heavy
loaded with heavy
metals.
metals. There's also corn in there, even corn and some food additives that could be,
Yeah,
allergenic.
bad
Yeah.
stuff.
I know. I have tattoos, not a lot. I have like 6 or
Little
7
one. Yeah.
little ones, but now now I'm questioning, should I
I
get
think
an
this
8th? Probably not.
I think this is something we need to raise, though. I haven't read much about it. I haven't seen that there's, now we're talking about microplastics. Good. We need to be talking about the inks in tattoos and how lethal and toxic they may be. I remember writing some time ago an article called "Is Your Lipstick is Making You Sick?" There's lead in lipstick, cadmium in
Yeah.
eyeshadow. These things
Yeah.
they're turning
Yeah.
into xenoestrogens and disrupting your endocrine system. So that's another big piece of all of this that we're talking about.
And let's switch gears and talk about birth control options. I know, Jess, you were talking about your history being on birth control. I think you said 8 months coming off and getting your cycle back. If when females come to me and they want non-hormonal methods, I mean, obviously you have things like a rhythm method, you have just general barrier methods, and you have maybe a Paragard IUD, which can have side effects, but at least it's
Mhm.
non-hormonal. So those are kind of the general, more non-hormonal. I want to get your take on those, and then what you did to help get yourself off of the typical more hormonal methods, whether it's like a low estrogen, a Yasmin, an ethinyl estradiol. Then they have some of the synthetic progesterone, the levonorgestrel, whether it's like the Kylena, the Marina,
Mhm.
say Kylena, Marina, and there's one
Um,
more.
what
Skylar.
was
Those
the
are the
one
big
you just
three on
said?
the
Oh, right,
Skylar.
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 Mhm.
Yeah, those are the big three. Like Marina is the highest, and then I think Kylena is the lowest. So those are like the synthetic kind of progesterone
Mhm.
ones.
Yeah, I
Bad
mean,
stuff.
But go ahead, I want to get
I
your
was
take.
on hormonal birth control, so, uh
Ethinyl estradiol
everything. I cycled through
okay.
so many different types of birth control because
Because of side effects.
just I mean, I was young. I didn't know what I was
Hmm.
taking, and yeah, some side effects. Also,
Hmm.
going to Planned
Migraine.
Parenthood and trying to get it for
Hmm.
free, and then I would go and they'd be like, "Oh,
Hmm.
we don't have that one that you were taking. Now let's get you on something else." So,
I see.
just
Switch it out every
Capsule.
switching,
yeah.
yeah, switching back and forth. And so, I mean, the biggest thing with hormonal birth control pills is that it is working to prevent pregnancy by shutting down ovulation and essentially stopping
Mhm.
communication between the brain and the ovaries. And it's highly recommended by OBGYNs and doctors for women that are having painful periods or irregular cycles or acne or anxiety, depression. It seems to be
It's the deep.
PCOS. It seems to be the default recommendation. And so, what we have
Yeah.
to remember is that it can it's like putting a band-aid on a bullet hole, right? It can
Right.
suppress some of these problems. And I mean, even still for women with endometriosis, for example, sometimes it's almost a necessary evil for a period of time for the pain. But then the problem is that, again, it's suppressing everything so that when you decide to eventually come off of hormonal birth control because you want to get pregnant or you're getting older, whatever your reasons are, you're not feeling well, you can experience this cluster of side effects, this resurgence of symptoms that you went on the pill to suppress in the first place. And sometimes they come back with a vengeance. And then
Roaring
there's
back.
additional symptoms. And so um,
Yeah.
that's obviously with the IUD, it's not necessarily suppressing ovulation. And I shouldn't say obviously, but the IUD is not suppressing ovulation in all cases. I
Hormonally,
Hormonally,
right?
yeah. I
Yeah.
think it was the Marina IUD that they showed the first year it suppresses ovulation in about 85% of cases when the dose is its highest, and then it starts to go down from there. So you can still be ovulating,
Mhm.
which is why I do prefer, if we're going to choose between the pill and the
Mhm.
IUD, I would choose an IUD over the pill. Um, but that being said, once we get to a point where we do want to come off of, especially the pill, a lot of women will just kind of cold turkey it and then they experience all of these symptoms. They're like, oh my God. And then they get
Right.
scared and they go back on it. And so, what I always recommend, if you can, is take 3 to 6 months to gradually transition. Don't come right off of it. Spend
Mhm.
3 months repleting the nutrients that get depleted specifically from the pill. So like
Right.
vitamin C, magnesium, selenium, um,
Yeah, folate,
yeah,
B12, right?
B12.
folate, the B vitamins. And so, I mean, one of the
Yeah.
easiest ways of doing that is just getting on a really high quality prenatal. We love Wenatal
Mhm.
because the ratios, do you know
Mhm.
about it? Okay,
No, I don't.
Wenatal is one of the best on the market. There's so many prenatals that are just
What's special about it?
it has a higher levels of all of the B vitamins, which
Methylated B's, yeah.
a lot of times in prenatals, you're actually getting very low imbalanced amounts. It has a good amount of choline, a
Mhm.
good amount of magnesium. It has a great amount of
Mhm.
vitamin D3 plus K2, which you don't always find
That's
in a
good.
prenatal. There's 4,000 IU of vitamin D.
Well, that's a good amount.
So it's got the right balance of nutrients. It's also very well studied and researched. The founders actually started by creating a male prenatal because there weren't many on the
Mm.
market, being that men are 50% of the equation. And so now they have a male
Mm.
and female prenatal. So I always get a woman who wants to transition on a high quality prenatal and then making
Mm.
sure that they are really nourishing their nervous system. And so we'll do that
Mm.
through cycle syncing practices where we're cycling certain nutrients with that's a whole nother conversation. We can't really cycle sync when we're on hormonal birth control. But what we can do is we can adopt some of the practices like bringing down high intensity exercise, especially during heightened periods of stress, balancing it out with more restorative movement. So adding in a lot more walking, yoga, stretching, mobility, strength training is huge. I try to get all women to strength train. And we'll really just make sure that the body feels as safe as it possibly can. We'll obviously bring in some magnesium and make sure that we're focusing on
Mhm.
blood sugar support. And then once they start to transition off of hormonal birth control, they're either not experiencing symptoms or they're way reduced. And that's what happened in my case. I really didn't have any symptoms when I transitioned off, other than that, I didn't have a period. And it took about 8 months of consistency until I got my period back. But that's when I added in progesterone, bioidentical progesterone cream, because my progesterone levels were so low since they had been suppressed by the pill. So
Well, what
then
about the aura?
in terms of, okay, what do we transition to? We still don't
Mhm.
have great options. The only non-hormonal IUD is the copper IUD. And
Paragard.
yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of women experience side effects. They
Mhm.
experience really heavy bleeds, pain,
Mhm.
and so I've seen a lot of women that have had to come off of that, including my sister. And so I say,
Mm.
it is a bio-individual approach. It can work well for some, but my choice is the fertility awareness method, and it really is just
Mhm.
tracking your cycle, taking your basal body
Mhm.
temperature, and there's so many wearables that help make this so easy. You can get the Aura Ring, which is
Yeah.
connected to natural cycles, which basically overnight is taking your basal body temperature, and then eventually giving you this algorithm once it has enough data that will tell you if you're either in a fertile or non-fertile phase. And I mean, it's user dependent. So you have to be consistent with it. You have to make sure that you are collecting enough data. And then ideally, you're also tracking other things like cervical fluid changes, symptom changes, and you're not just doing that. And, if you're not trying to get pregnant, you don't want to just rely on that instantly. I would say use backup protection even during the quote unquote non-fertile days until you really have the method down and you feel really confident that you know how to use it. But it can be up to
Yeah.
99.6% effective with perfect use.
Mm.
The healthier you are, the more consistent your cycle is. And I tell my female patients, get a good app like Flow or Kindara or one of the apps that
Yeah.
you mentioned. Get some OPK strips. Test a couple of times in your cycle of when you are typically ovulating. It's usually going to be between 12 to 15, and then 2 to 3 days on the front and the back side of that. You just have a barrier protection with that. And then that's usually going to give you that upwards of 99 plus
Right.
percent
Yeah,
protection right around
exactly.
there.
And I think the thing though that people have to know is that basal body temperature tracking only tells you that you have already ovulated, not the ovulation is approaching, whereas OPK tests can give you an
Mhm.
idea of when ovulation is approaching as well as cervical fluid
Right.
changes. And so I think that's important to note because
Right.
it's like, well, it's a little late if you already ovulated.
Well, with the temperature though, you could get a little bit of a start because there's a drop first, right? There's a drop of 0.3 Fahrenheit and then a spike. So I think you may get a little bit if you see a drop. But again, if you have multiple methods
Yeah.
with an OPK plus you're looking at cervical mucus, and then you add an extra thing, then you have pretty good
Yeah, I mean,
support
I
there.
like a wearable because especially with Oura Ring, if you can afford it, it's gonna filter out some of the inconsistencies, like, if you because temperature readings are really finicky, unfortunately, and so if
Mhm.
you drink alcohol the night before, you were traveling, or you got up to pee a few times, it can increase your temperature, and because it's by such a small amount, it can impact results, so I like that I think Oura Ring, it probably waits 3 to 4 days of high temperature readings before it actually confirms
Yeah.
ovulation. It's not gonna tell you, "Oh, you ovulated just because you had 1 high temperature a day."
Right. Right. That makes sense. I also recommend using a lot of herbs that work on the HPA G axis, like chaste
Yes.
tree or like Dong Quai, or even giving organ glandulars
Mhm.
too. There's a lot of nutrients that are specific to those tissues that can be in those organs, and so those tend to be a really good reset when you're off a cycle or off not having a cycle, not having. What happens is the hormones are so high because you're giving it synthetically, and so it shuts down the FSH and the LH, so it starts to bring some of those upstream signaling hormones
Do you
up
have
a
an
little bit.
You
organ meat capsule that you like?
There's a couple that are out there. I think Ancestral Health,
Yeah.
Ancestral Health has a couple that are out there. Also, Ancient
Mhm.
Nutrition, they have a couple, and then you got companies like Biotics have a few, and Standard Process has some pretty good ones
Mhm.
as well.
Yeah.
That'll have the full kind of pituitary ovary type of
Yeah.
connection feedback.
Yeah. I've been wanting to add that in
Yeah,
myself for energy.
yeah. Oh no, I think organ meats. If you look at ancestral, cultures, organ meats were always kind of harvested and they were given to the women that were going to be getting pregnant
Mhm.
soon in that tribe. And so there was a lot of intuition that these glands had lots of
Yeah.
nutrients.
Yeah.
And so, instead of eating it today, we can get it in supplemental form, which can still be great, even if you're not of cycling age, or even if you're not like trying to conceive, it's still going to provide beneficial health.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another herb that
Yeah.
I just started reading about recently, I was blown away, is fenugreek, which is an
Oh yeah.
Indian Ayurvedic Persian herb that has been used for centuries by Indian women. Evidently, they use it all through the life cycle. The young girls use it for period cramps. The older women use it for menopausal things. And they did some studies. I was looking at life extensions research, and they did this. There's some pretty good randomized trials out there that look at women 45 to 58 who had like 500 milligrams of fenugreek seed and for like 42 days. And there were these amazing improvements, like 31% increase in estradiol, which is the active form of estrogen,
Yeah.
and all kinds of symptom relief on the menopause rating scale, like down, hot flashes, 35% down, and overall like a 76% improvement in symptoms. So I was kind of excited about fenugreek. I've never heard about that, but
That's
now I
amazing.
I've seen that for increasing testosterone in
Mhm.
women, as well as improving
really,
libido. Women who are breastfeeding increases breast milk production
wow.
too. So lots of good benefits there. Yeah, I mean, I also like, I mean, maca's
Love it.
wonderful. White peony, shepherd's purse, Vitex or chaste tree. You mentioned Dong Quai or black cohosh can be some good estrogen modulators too that can help.
Hmm.
And then just getting the diet dialed in. That's so key because if we don't have all that cholesterol and all those fat soluble vitamins, that's the backbone. All of our hormones that are like downstream, right? Those are all steroid based
Mhm.
hormones, right? Your progesterone, your estrogen.
Yeah.
So that's all going to be cholesterol based. And then all your upstream, like from your pituitary up, those are all peptide based for the most part. That's all protein based. So that's why protein and fat together are so important for
Oh
your
my
hormonal
gosh, yes.
system.
Last night, I made my husband and I grass-fed steak with grass-fed herb butter from Kerrygold. Have
Oh,
you
that's
had that?
great.
The grass-fed
Nice.
it's the herb
That's
one,
great.
oh my gosh, it's so
Hmm.
good with mushrooms and asparagus. We just had, like, ton of veggies, grass-fed butter, and the steak.
Yeah.
It was so satisfying. It was so, so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, grass-fed butter makes everything better.
It does. I went carnivore for a week last week, and I had steaks almost every night, and I put Kerrygold on my steak
That's
every
so
night.
delicious.
You
I
It was
know.
went
amazing.
carnivore. That's
For a
hilarious.
week. I love
Are you?
it.
What are you when
And I
when you're
actually
not
I
going
lost 5 pounds.
carnivore?
Wow.
I mainly kind of do a lower carb keto paleo
Mhm.
ish.
Hmm.
I'll go mainly just meat and veggies. Like today, my wife made me some tuna with some cut up kale, some pickles, and some avocado with some
That's
avocado
good.
mayo. So it was
Mm.
nice. Like maybe 30, 40 grams of protein, some good fats. And then, talking about a simple, easy breakfast, my kind of patented breakfast is coffee with about 20 to 30 grams of collagen
Mhm.
mixed in. And I do a tablespoon of butter, Kerrygold, and a tablespoon of MCT oil. So I just do a little kind of butter coffee, so it's like you got the fat, you got the protein, and it's
Yeah.
just, still get the
Have you
morning
heard
routine
of
going.
Kamana? So
No,
it's
what's
this
that?
brand new superfood. It's mesquite. And it's a superfood, I
Mm,
believe, from Peru. I'll have to double check that, but it's
mm,
been, triple lab tested. It's been tested for mold, all of the things.
mm,
It's a prebiotic, so it's really good for the gut, but you
mm,
can brew it and steep it just like coffee. But it's caffeine free. So for people that don't do well with coffee, or have gut health issues, I've been loving that because I haven't been able to drink coffee for 6 years. It's just a trigger for me for my
mm,
migraines, but I
mm.
love the taste, and so this has
Mm.
been great. I feel like I feel the difference in my gut too when I drink it, so I'll do kind of what you do, but I'll do it
Yeah,
with that, and then I'll add a scoop of protein or collagen and some
yeah.
coconut milk and some cinnamon, and I blend it, and then I heat it, and I put more cinnamon on the top, and that really tides me over, and so that then I have a later breakfast. So I think especially for women too on the go, that's such a good hack.
And you talked about collagen. Collagen's a third glycine, right? So we talked about, sorry, collagen is more than a third, but it's a third glutamine. So you talked about
Mhm.
glutamine earlier for your gut. You get a lot of good gut support with those amino acids that are in collagen.
Yeah, you can even
I
add
want to
bone broth.
Yep.
I want to
Yeah.
just ask a quick question. You mentioned and
Yeah.
acetylcysteine as being one
Yeah.
of your essentials,
Hmm.
and I understand that it's the precursor to glutathione.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
I see a lot of people now starting to use acetyl glutathione, just
Hmm.
directly. And I'm wondering what is your feeling about? Do you prefer to provide something like the precursor so that it converts in the body naturally, or go straight to the glutathione, the master antioxidant?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are studies on the fact that glutathione will not cross the blood-brain barrier. So I always recommend NAC. You can do glutathione too, whether it's reduced, liposomal, or acetylated, but you want NAC because it can cross the blood-brain barrier, convert to glutathione in the brain. Plus, NAC is all kinds of all my cycling women who are trying to get pregnant. Studies on NAC, 600 milligrams helps with the oxidative stress with the eggs, with the ovaries, and
Wow.
also it decreases first trimester abortion. I mean, not abortion, miscarriage. It
Yeah.
decreases
Miscarriage.
first trimester miscarriage. So it helps with the oxidation of the egg, so it protects it better from just whatever's happening with the free
Who
radical stress.
knew? That's
Yeah,
Wow.
so it helps with
interesting.
reduce miscarriage, and then it helps with just egg quality, egg health. You'll see AMH levels become a little bit more healthier as well.
Do you have a
I
brand that you
started
like?
using it. Go
Oh,
ahead.
I mean, there's a lot of good brands out there as long as, it's a tier 1 company like Thorne or Designs for Health, or
We
there's a
love
lot of good companies out
Quicksilver.
there. Yeah, Quicksilver is good. Yeah,
Yeah.
I just try to look at the back and make sure it's in a cellulose capsule that breaks down nice. I don't love some companies have the big tablets. I don't love those as much. And just making sure you don't see like rice flour and a lot of that stuff in there. Try
Right.
to keep it really clean.
The Quicksilver is just a liposomal.
Yeah, so liposomal's
Mhm.
great. Yep, that's nice. But NAC is an easy one because like the government did studies just 3 years ago comparing NAC to Rogaine and Oxidil for hair loss, and it outperformed Rogaine and Oxidil in phase 3 clinical
Oh
trials. And
my
so,
God,
oh
that's good
yeah. And
information.
it helps with some gray hair too because it helps neutralize, helps support the pseudocatalase enzyme that helps neutralize some of the hydrogen peroxide at the follicle level that converts your hair to a more gray color. So there's a lot of good benefits with NAC.
So
Yeah.
just to clarify, your preference would be to use the NAC versus going straight to the glutathione, because you're saying even an acetylized version of glutathione will not cross the blood-brain barrier.
So I prefer both, but if
Oh,
I could only choose one, if someone was on an extreme budget, I would choose NAC every time,
Mm.
uh-huh.
especially when there's breathing issues because NAC, like they've used NAC in a acetylcysteine version for cystic fibrosis kids since the 70s. They'll put them
Oh,
in a nebulizer and it breaks up mucus. It helps with oxidative stress. And so you can do NAC in a nebulizer, as you start to get sick, that'll really help with the oxidative stress, the low oxygen, the mucus. And you can just take it orally to break down any of the mucus that you get when you start to get sick or have allergies. So I love
it's
NAC.
it's an
Mhm.
anti-mucolytic, right? I first used
Anti-mucolytic. It's
I
also antiviral. It's also anticoagulant. So there's so
amazing.
many other benefits there. Yeah.
I started using NAC when I had pneumonia. So we lived in
Oh,
London for a long time, and I would consistently get these bronchial things. And the last time I got it, I just could not get over it. And I
yeah.
finally learned about NAC. I took it with some cayenne capsules, and I
Yep.
fixed myself. It
Yeah.
was
So I
amazing.
love it. And then you can if it starts getting dicey, you can even nebulize it. You just, you can get a prescription for Mucomist, or there's ways you can do it with sterile saline to make it really good too. So I like that. Is there anything else on the fertility side? Oh, so one other thing I want to talk about, right? I see a lot of women who are like, they're in their 20s or 30s, they're fine. And now they're getting into their 40s and like, why am I gaining weight? And so the big thing outside of just having bad habits that are compounding over time, when you're younger, you have a stronger metabolism, you can overcome stuff. But as your hormones start to drop as you get older, as you go into perimenopause, menopause, those hormones make you more prone to becoming insulin resistant. And so the dietary habits you have in your 20s and 30s, and maybe the lack of maybe the excess exercise as you get older, maybe the exercise drops and now you're more insulin resistant. You have to be tighter on your diet, tighter on your exercise, because you got that losing battle with insulin. Can you comment on that?
Oh,
Just the fact that as females get older, same with males, but males don't have the same hormonal shift that women do, is that as estrogen, progesterone, testosterone drops, we start to become more insulin resistant.
yeah. Well, I'm sort of thinking about first thing. My dog just came in.
Mm,
Um, I, I'm thinking about the fact that it's so difficult for women to control the blood sugar when their
hmm.
adrenals are kind of in the ascendancy,
Yeah.
because and the testosterone as well. I mean, we know that higher insulin increases testosterone at the
Hmm.
ovarian level too.
Hmm.
So that's a big link.
Hmm.
And the other thing, when I think about overweight in women, older women, I think about the metabolism slowing down. I think about the cravings, the adrenal issues that promote the cravings, that promote the blood sugar imbalance, and thus
Hmm.
the rise in insulin, the lack of the sleep disruption that disrupts insulin production as well, and also the fact that so many women are, they're not. We talk so often in menopause about estrogen deficiency, and really more often it's about estrogen dominance. It's the
Hmm.
progesterone that is really plummeting. We have
Yeah.
so little progesterone, but we often have estrogen because it's made in fat cells, right? It's
Hmm.
converted by the aromatase enzyme in fat cells, and we have estrogen dominance that's actually running interference with the conversion of T4 to T3 in the
Hmm.
thyroid. So you get a lot of women will go and have their thyroid tested. They get a TSH test and told everything's normal, and yet if you look at the T4, T3, it's not converting, and that's interfered with by the insulin resistance as well, and that causes, of course, the weight gain because the thyroid is slowing down or is inhibited. The thyroid is inhibited. It's still functional, but it's not optimized in its function.
Well, and there's also the fact that with low progesterone can, increase cortisol, which then impacts blood sugar.
Which then impacts
And then if we're dealing with sleep disturbances, which happens in this transition, then that also impacts our blood sugar levels. So I think there's so many different, it's multifactorial. I would say though that I often see, just because I do work with a lot of people that are struggling with weight in this age range, I find that there's a lot of habit changes that occur over these years. And so, I know that it can be a little bit more challenging, but I will say that with some tweaks to the balance again of the foods on your plate and just being really intentional about increasing strength training, because this, especially in the late 30s, 40s, and 50s, is so, so crucial for supporting insulin sensitivity and for balancing blood sugar, increasing testosterone, which again goes low when we get into this perimenopause, menopause transition. And we're also losing bone mass and muscle mass. And so, I see a lot of people that are still cardio junkies and really focused and obsessed with that. And so if I can get women, because that's my primary demographic, to come off of all of the high intensity cardio, to actually go for more walks, do more strength training, and really prioritize those 3 balanced meals with high protein, fiber, and fat, that almost always moves the needle.
So the walking's good. And what's your issue with the high intensity interval stuff?
So women's bodies are very sensitive to external stressors because obviously the body's main priority is to house and protect a potential fetus. And so unlike men, we're just a lot more sensitive. And so, and most of the studies around HIIT training, high intensity cardio have been done on a male body because female bodies, because of our hormonal fluctuations, are frustrating and unpredictable. And so we don't make great case studies. And so with women, it's not to say that we have to cut out HIIT training. It can still be beneficial for insulin sensitivity, but it's how you place it. So as you get into the second half of the cycle in the luteal phase, and especially the premenstrual week, when resting cortisol levels are naturally higher, we're less resilient to stress. That extra cardio and HIIT can just add that extra stress that pushes us over the edge and can actually result in heightened PMS symptoms and period issues. And then can also, I've seen in many cases, create anovulatory cycles. Typically that's paired with other stressors as well. But I do see, like I said previously, the client that was a marathon runner or the clients that are just obsessed with high intensity cardio all month long, oftentimes they're the ones that are not regularly ovulating or having irregular cycles. So it's really just about the balance and being intentional about when you pepper it in, and also making sure that you're balancing it with enough restorative movement, strength training, and rest. But again, it can be really beneficial, like in the first half of the cycle, the follicular and ovulatory phases, when resting cortisol is naturally lower. We're more resilient to stress. We tend to be less insulin resistant. We can add in some of that HIIT training and extra cardio, and actually that ends up being really beneficial for our goals.
So the timing.
It's the timing. Yeah. And it's also, I think you mentioned this earlier, but what time of day are we working out? Are you doing a high intensity workout right before bed and then struggling with sleep? Whereas maybe if you put that in the morning after you had like your protein coffee, right, then it's going to be more beneficial for you.
That makes
And
sense.
I mean, all these things that contribute to the stress response, the increase in blood sugar, the increase in insulin, we have to keep in mind. So then you've got sugar cravings in people eating that way. Remember to have fiber slows the impact of sugar upon the gut. and brings that down. Also, I think it's important to think about high glycemic foods, to become
Mhm.
aware of the glycemic load
Mhm.
of those
Mhm.
foods that hit the system with a rush of sugar that is difficult for the body to regulate the time.
Um,
So, and it's interesting when you look at the low glycemic versus high glycemic load, how certain food, like one type of melon may be really high glycemic, whereas another is not. I can't remember. I think it's honeydew is
mm,
lower than cantaloupe.
mm.
They're just these subtle differences, but bringing in all of this information can help us to keep that blood sugar, insulin controlled, or at least help the adrenals to do their job.
Very good. And then I imagine you said you use the Oura ring for fertility for ovulation.
Mhm.
You could also probably use your Oura ring for HRV or readiness score too,
Yep.
to probably
Mhm.
gauge what kind of exercise you should be doing. I tell all my female patients the same thing. Make sure whatever exercise you're doing, make sure one, you feel better afterwards than when you started. You should never
Yes.
feel worse. Two, you should be able to emotionally repeat it.
Yes.
You shouldn't feel so depleted, so beaten up. And three, that next day or that nighttime, if it was a morning workout, you should not feel overly tired, overly sore, hit by a bus. So if you're doing that, then you can always adjust the intensity, the frequency, the duration, so you can answer kind of positively to those kind of checks.
I love that. That's a really good rule of thumb. Because I think
Yeah.
too, I mean, I used to be this way where it's like, if I'm not so sore and can't walk the
Yes.
next day, and
Yes.
it's like, actually,
Yeah.
you shouldn't be incredibly sore and unable to walk.
Right. The only exception is like you're doing a new movement for the first
Right,
time,
right,
right?
right,
Then
right.
okay, you're doing lunges or squats for the first time. Okay, fine.
You're
But
gonna be
outside of
sore.
that, yeah, you'd be a little bit sore, right? For sure. That makes sense. And
Mhm.
then just for the listeners listening at home, your guys' website is Your Hormone Balance. And are you guys both working with patients one on one? Can you talk about what you do there?
Yeah, so I'll give this little spiel. So over at yourhormonebalance.com, we offer our hormone testing and rebalancing packages. So
Mhm.
there's options to choose between, and then you can choose to add on a consultation with my mom, Candace, once your
Mhm.
results come in, and she'll interpret the results with you, spend an
Mm.
hour with you. As you can tell, she's very passionate. She's very
Mm.
invested in every single one of our clients. And we also provide a lot of education. There's a
Mm.
whole, we have a whole rebalancing strategy guide. So a lot of support. And ideally, we love for our clients to come back and retest in 3 to 6 months, and then, to add on another call just to see how things have progressed. And then for me, um, I'm with Your Hormone Balance, but my business is bodyblissbyjess.com. And
Mm.
I also take client sessions, but I focus more, as you could probably tell in this conversation, on the nutrition side, the
Mm.
mindset, the nervous system regulation, cycle syncing. So I'm very much the tangible next steps person. And I find that mindset is incredibly important as well as we're going
Mm.
through these tough times. So and these transitional years as well. So yeah, that's kind of how we operate. And we have a really great symptom quiz at yourhormonebalance.com. I know you were going to put that in the show notes.
Yeah, anyone listening, in the description, it'll be the first two links right below.
Cool. So yeah, it's just a great quiz to take to kind of get a gauge of, could some of the symptoms you're experiencing be a hormone imbalance? And then you also receive via email some free resources and a discount on testing when you take that quiz.
And I
Great.
would like to mention that when I talk to people and we have our test results, we're looking at the test results together. We are also correlating the symptoms, because people put in all of their symptoms, mild, moderate, severe, and then we correlate those symptoms with the levels that are showing up on the test results, so that people can understand, yeah, your estrogen's really low. No wonder you have some vaginal dryness there. Yes, I just see Dr. James L. Wilson. Someone's making a comment. He's an old friend, Dr. Wilson. He coined the term adrenal fatigue, and he first started that whole conversation. But I think it really brings it home when you can put the numbers, go beyond the numbers on a test result, and link them up with the symptoms you're experiencing. Then the whole thing starts to come into focus.
Very good. Excellent. Well, anything else you want to leave listeners with? I'm going to put Jess, I'm going to put your info below as well. So you'll see your hormone balance link. I'll put Body Bliss by Jess. And then I put the quiz, the hormonal quiz that you guys talked about. So if you guys are looking for that, just look below in the description. You guys will see it there. Anything else, Candace or Jess, you want to leave the listeners with?
Well,
I would just say start slow and grow. I know we've talked about a lot
Mhm.
of different things, and I really like people to feel like they are empowered with the information and
Mm,
the knowledge instead of overwhelmed, and that it gets to be this aha moment of, okay,
mm,
maybe, my symptoms are, I'm not crazy for experiencing this. My symptoms aren't normal, and there is support, there is help. There are people that care and that really want to help, and that there's things that I can do that will move the needle relatively quickly, but it doesn't need to be done overnight. These simple changes can make a world of difference. So just have patience and kindness with yourself and take it one step at a time. But I definitely think that having professional support is key.
and I'd
that's
like to
great.
speak to the women my age,
Mm,
who are in menopause and have been in menopause for a while. So many women will say to me, "Well, I'm in menopause. I don't have any hormones anymore, right? I'm out of hormones. So what does it matter? Do I really need to care about my hormones?" And I think, what I often say is, well, 100 years ago, we didn't live much past 50, so we didn't have to worry about
right.
this. But now we're living to be 85, 90. We don't want to be running on empty. These hormones have roles to play. They have functions in the body that are still very essential to your well-being. Women need to stay strong as we get older. That strength training is so important. And
Right.
all these things that we can do to maintain. Maybe it means some hormone replenishment, but it is big. The adrenals take over all hormone production at menopause. They've got to pick up the slack. So it's adrenal support, it's all the things we're talking about. And it can make a huge difference to your third act. We have another 30
Yeah.
years to go here, and we cannot be running on empty. So don't think that you're done. This is, you these can be the best years of your life if you take those steps. And I hope to encourage. I'm in my 70s now, and I'm still rolling along,
Great.
running
Rolling with
like
the
a
rest of
dog
them.
on the beach.
That's great. Well, thanks so much, Jess and Candace. You guys talked about a lot of important things. You talked about the nutrients behind hormones. I mean, you go to your typical OB, they very rarely even talk about
Right.
nutrients, the building blocks, metabolizing hormones, the xenoestrogens. We talked about a lot of the nutrition, talked about the curving out that kind of blood sugar roller coaster, because that can create its own hormonal cascade from cortisol, adrenaline, can drop progesterone out. We talked about some of the diet and lifestyle things, exercise importances, insulin resistance. Anything else you want to add? We hit all the big
Oh,
stuff. Some of the lab testing, we hit the lab testing, the importance of the adrenals in this whole thing. I think that is just totally ignored by mainstream medicine. You never hear that kind of touched upon or talked about. How
no.
important cholesterol is in your diet to this, right? It's very easy to be on a low fat stage,
Yeah,
which means cholesterol tends to be low as well if you're going low
that's a
fat, right?
little known fact that
Yeah,
cholesterol is the backbone of hormone
yeah,
production. Cholesterol, steroid hormone,
yeah, yeah.
so
Steroid,
important
yep.
with that. Yeah.
Well, very
I don't
good.
know, I feel like we've covered so much. Have we left
Yeah.
anything out, listeners?
Well, I think we hit it all there. I'll put the links down below, Body Bliss by Jess and yourhormonebalance.com. I'll put it
Oh,
all
I have one more
there.
thing to
Hmm.
add. That
Hmm.
I have a podcast myself called Women
Mm,
Talking Frankly, which I
mm,
co-host with with a nurse practitioner, Kyle McAvoy, and we do mostly talk to women in our age range.
mm.
We have 55, 56 episodes now, and we've interviewed some
Great.
interesting people. Dr. Zava, Kenneth Stevenson, who's one of the premier by she's been doing BHRT for ages. Carol Peterson, who's one of the she was the compounding pharmacist for Women's International and is now
Great.
advisor for Quicksilver. So some of the people that have been in the field, I need to ask Dr. Wilson on too, but some of the people I made contact with, both that are the matrix of this functional
Cool.
medicine world, the founders are on our podcast, and we have some really, sometimes we get into the weeds, but I think there's a lot of information that women can benefit from, and it's fun. We just have a conversation like we just had today. So Women Talk
Great.
Frankly.
Appreciate it. And then Jess, how about you? Anything else?
I got Solo 2.0 podcast. I have a podcast as well with
Yeah,
my sister,
Cool.
all health, hormones, mindset, personal development.
it's great too.
Great. We'll have this all transcribed and we'll put it in the show notes so anyone who's listening can access it. All right, ladies, nice chat with you all. Great conversation back and forth. I think we put a lot of good actionable information. I guess if someone's listening, it's an hour and a half long. Just take one piece of content. We'll summarize it all up. Take one thing. If someone could just take one thing, what would it be?
Oh,
Just one thing. Like, all right, I'm overwhelmed. Like, what's that one thing?
Support, take care, give your adrenal glands some TLC. The idea of putting the oxygen mask on before you help anybody else. Look after yourself and look after your adrenals. I mean, I think as the starting point, that blood
But
sugar
one thing,
regulation
if
is
someone wants to
key.
take care of the adrenals, what's the one thing though they can do?
The
If they
one
want to
thing
take care of themselves in general?
Or for the adrenals, like your mom said, like what's the
Oh,
one
okay.
thing?
I think they need B complex. To
B
me,
complex.
that's
Okay.
key.
Okay. Cool.
I
How about
say
you?
I say really focusing on protein and fat and fiber at
Mhm.
every meal. Protein,
Yeah.
fat, fiber every meal, at least 25 to
Yeah.
35 grams of protein.
I think that's a really good first step. Great. Awesome.
Mhm.
Well, thanks, Jess and Candace. I'll end the stream here and we'll chat with you guys afterwards. Nice chatting with you.